Right, again, so welcome everyone. I'm sure people will jump in while I'm starting up, but that's fine. I want to respect everyone that's here's time. So I'll just let them in as they come in. Welcome to the Auto Grading and Assignments with Coding Rooms webinar. The platform we'll be using today to check out how to do some auto grading is Coding Rooms. I'm going to throw the link in the chat just in case you haven't visited the site. A number of people, it is going to be their first experience with Coding Rooms today, about 80% of you here, at least 80% that signed up. So you can visit that. I'm going to start to share my screen. And so here is the website. Again, if you haven't navigated, codingrooms.com, you can go to start to check that out. And Coding Rooms is a really excellent platform for you to deliver your computer science curriculum and work with your students. Instead of the days of having to set up your computer lab and fiddle around with your programming environment and make sure everything works, now right from a Chromebook or any device with the internet, your students can access a developing environment pre-configured and ready to go, and it should work every time. One of the amazing things about Coding Rooms, although we're not going to cover it today, is the live classroom feature, where your students in real time can see your code side by side with theirs in the same classroom environment, as well as you can very easily, with a click of a button, see your students' code, jump right into it and help them out, as well as see error messages and things that are happening with all the students in your class really easily. So that's something for definitely check out if it's your first time with Coding Rooms today. You can sign up and log in to Coding Rooms for the webinar. What we're going to be focusing again on is mainly the assignments feature in Coding Rooms, things for your labs, your exercises, your practice problems, or your projects in your class. And of course, we're going to look at how you can set up auto grading for those things. We're going to primarily focus on two different programming languages, Python and Java. So I'll show examples today in Python and Java. We'll look at just assignments in Coding Rooms, how it works, how to set one up. Then we'll start to look at the test bench and actually see how we can start to do some testing or auto grading with your assignments. First, we'll just look at simple input-output type of things, and then we'll look at some examples of how to set up unit testing. You can do a couple different things. You can follow along. So if you log into Coding Rooms and maybe set up a class, you could kind of follow along and try to do some of the examples with me. You can try things on your own and kind of keep me off to the side. You can also just watch and listen and take notes. And a great thing is we are recording this webinar, so you'll be able to access the video after to go back and review any aspect of it. Don't be afraid to ask questions throughout. We have, the Coding Rooms team is here actually with us today, and then they'll be monitoring the chat, helping me out, as well as I'll be taking a peek over at it, and you can always unmute and ask me questions too.
Sure thing. Thanks, Joe, for the intro also. Do you mind giving us co-host so that we can go ahead and let people back in if they rejoin?
How about, Sasha, I don't know what's going to do with the video. I was going to say, I'll make you host. My account actually doesn't have co-host.
Okay, no worries then. Just, I noticed someone said that they have some issues with audio, but it doesn't seem to be affecting anyone else. So.
Okay, thank you. Once you log into Coding Rooms, you can go over to the courses area, and assignments live inside of a course. So there are mainly three sections in Coding Rooms: courses, where you're going to build your different assignments and be able to assign them to a specific set of students that you've set up for your course. There's also the live classroom feature, which I mentioned in the beginning. And again, something you have to for sure check out because it is the highlight of coding rooms. And then there's also workspaces, which is just an individual workspace for your students to work on projects, side projects on their own, or any other tests you want to do or side projects you want to test out on coding rooms, just to set up an environment that isn't tied to a specific assignment or live classroom. So you can see those 3 tabs at the top there. Once you enter a classroom, a course, I'm sorry, one of the courses you have set up, you can actually create a new assignment. There's an assignments tab to show any of the assignments as part of your course. And you also have the button over in the top right to create a new assignment. What we're going to look at first is we're going to create an assignment that just does a simple output print command to display some information down in the console. And then we're going to look at how you can actually auto grade something as simple as that. So I'm just going to call this Hello World. Very basic thing. And it'll be our Hello World auto grading. When you create an assignment, the first thing that you're displayed with after you give it a title is the actual prompt. This is any information you want to provide to the students while they're working on the actual assignment. One thing in a minute when I show you actually what the assignment ends up looking like is I really like how Coding Rooms displays this prompt right in the same window as the actual IDE or programming environment for the students to complete the task. So for instance, I can give some instructions like use print to say hello world, something like that, and my students will see that as a prompt. The next thing you probably want to check out in any assignment is the template. The template is, this is what your students are going to see when they open the assignment. This is where you can configure any additional files the students need or anything like that. This is a great question in the chat. Said they're having trouble formatting the text in Markdown. One of the things I can recommend over in the overview of the prompt is there is a toolbar that's available to help you format some of the different things. I have been using images in mine and they've been showing up well. They usually show up centered in there. Sasha and some of the team might be able to help you a little bit more in detail in chat, so they may message you about that. But definitely you can just use some of the tools in the toolbar over here. And that seems to work really well. But I did use, for instance, you saw me use Markdown to kind of just format this also. And it does, I believe, yep, it will automatically, so it's kind of what you see is what you get kind of editor here, where as soon as you try to do something with Markdown, it's going to convert into whatever it's trying to do, a header, etc. So over here in assignments, we have the template. And the template is what your students are going to see. Different workspaces, coding language workspaces have some different templates. Usually it's just a simple print of hello world, hello that language type of thing. And so you may want to remove that. Let's say you don't want your students to start off with that. You may want to, what I like to do a lot is add a comment to give them an additional prompt. Put your print below, or say hello world, and say whatever it may be. And whenever every student, this will populate on their workspace. So they'll see whatever you add to this template, including additional files that you can either upload or create a new blank file with. Important thing though is whatever changes you make here, you're gonna make sure you save them. Another thing that you may want to do is many teachers, what they do is you kind of have a sample solution to whatever programming assignment you put out. And so if you want to place encoding rooms to actually store that information, there's this tab called Model Solution. And you can create a model solution. It will open up the template and you can actually type in, and this is a place where you could maybe test some code too, but you can actually put in what the model solution is going to be. I think I put an exclamation point, actually, I told them to say. I can actually run this and it prints out hello world and I'm good. Now to assign it to students, what you want to do is you're going to use the Assign tab. Whatever students are set up in your class, so I didn't fully go over the class setup, but it's fairly self-explanatory, where you're going to add, students, you're going to give them a code to essentially join your course. But once you're ready to publish it to all the students that are in your course, you're going to click on Publish for that particular section. If you have multiple sections, they'll all show up here. What I like to do is after I set up an assignment, I actually open up the student preview, and it's going to open up as you, the teacher, so you can test out and make sure everything's working well. I'm going to open that as in a new tab, just to make it easy for me to navigate back. And now notice I'm in the student preview. So this is exactly what the student will see, but I'm in it as the teacher. This is how you can actually test to make sure your assignment's set up correctly, run the code, and make sure everything's working well. I'm going to open up the assignment workspace. And this is exactly what the student's experience will be, is exactly what you're seeing here. Again, like I said, I really like how the prompt is over here on the left-hand side and the students can program over here. My students really enjoy this also. All right in one window, they have this information. So I can go over and I can actually write code. And your students can run it and submit it. Now, we didn't set up any auto grading at all. So there's no feedback that we can provide the student at this time. The default is always just manual grading. The teacher's going to have to review the assignment and make sure that you did it correctly. Each one of the student submissions also are logged. So you can see every time the student clicks the submit button, you can kind of see what they were prompted with, and it's time stamped at that point. You can see this on the teacher end also. Now, of course, what we really want to look at today is we want to see how to set up this so it will actually auto grade it. And obviously we have something very basic here with this Python program. We just want them to print hello world. I'm over back in the tab where I'm setting up my assignment. And I'm going to go over to the test bench. The test bench is where you're going to create your test cases to actually evaluate what the student has submitted. One of the questions in the chat, just because I think it's a good one, the students won't see the model solution. I saw Sasha kind of starting to type there, and he may explain more. I think the Coding Rooms team has some ideas about, in the future, some things with the model solution. Right now, it's just for you, the teacher, the model solution, essentially. So let me click on Test Bench. And here's where we can add our test cases. These are the different things that you want to test the student's code against to see its correctness, essentially. You give it a title. If you are going to have multiple tests, for instance, this one's so simple, we really only need to test one thing, that it printed out hello world. If you have multiple tests, you may want to weight each one differently about the number of points they're going to be. We'll check out a couple other examples in a bit and where this might be a possibility. And what we're going to look at right now is just input-output comparison. We're just going to compare what the student's code, what the output stream of the student's code, essentially what the program will output to the console. We're going to compare it to what their code actually does output to what we'd expect it to output, what the solution should output. All we need to do right now is we're concerned with just the output stream, but essentially when you set up a test case like this, you can provide it with the input stream of the program and the output stream. Any values that we can pass in that will go into the standard input, and anything that we'd expect it to output. We'll talk about input in a little bit. We'll check out an example with that. But for now, just as I'm going kind of slower, we're just doing an output one. There are some different compare methods here. Most of the time, you're probably going to want a flexible equality here, where it's going to ignore case, white space. So if the student does hello world with a lowercase w, do you care? Sometimes you may want an exact match, and you can select that. So my desired output is hello world, exclamation point. So that's what I'm going to say is the output. This is what the student's output will be matched against. It's going to say, what did the student's code output? What do we expect? It should equal hello world, their output stream. And then it will say that their solution's correct. Another thing that you can set up is when their code actually fails to pass the test, you can provide some feedback to the student, maybe a helpful hint. So something like, make sure you print hello world using print. And now it will give them this as feedback if they fail the test, this test case. Again, I just have it for 1 point. Really, the points are only important if you need to weight each test differently. That's going to be mainly for more complicated tests. All right, I've set up this test case. The test case does save, automatically save. So a couple people were asking about the template and the model solution not saving. You do have to manually save those where you click the save button, but the test case should, whatever you type in here, automatically save for you. I'm going to go back to my student example where I had opened up the assignment. And now let me submit my code and let's see what happens now that I actually have a way to evaluate if it's correct. And notice now it tells me my score is 100%. I passed all the tests available. It was only one test. And it says output was hello world, which matches the expected output of hello world. Notice, because I had it set up to ignore some special things, uppercase, lowercase, spacing issues, and characters, it didn't care that the expected output was hello with a lowercase w and an exclamation point, and I only actually did hello world without that stuff. So that's why if you want an exact match, you want to set it to exact match. If you don't care about those things, you leave it so that it has flexibility and a student still gets the solution correct. Now, of course, I could still fail this. Maybe the student just does a print statement instead of hello world. I can click submit. And notice now I have a 0. Output was nothing. Expected output was hello world. Feedback, make sure you print hello world using print. So the question is, does the autograder only check output, or can it check if a student includes a loop or an if statement? So we're going to see unit testing where we can start to check some of those things. Actually, one of the things that we're looking at is a testing framework called Petal, which actually allows you to very easily check to see if a student did include an if statement or did include a for loop and stuff like that. So there are some ways that you can do that. Sasha, I'm not sure if you want to chime in, maybe even unmute if you have something to say about that specifically.
Sure. Yeah, Petal is something really exciting when it comes to actually checking code contents, and there's a lot of exciting literature about how you actually parse code and the things your compiler does to understand code. And so this library, Petal, uses those same exact methodologies that the compiler or interpreter would use in order to provide a very easy framework for you as the instructor to create tests where you say basically like assert, and when we get to unit testing, this keyword of assert will be like much more commonplace. Like assert, for loop exists, for example, and then, or for example, if you're just checking recursion, then there's no for loops. And if you're interested in that, that is definitely something that's probably a little further out on our product roadmap, but please drop us a line on the chat here and I'll add you to the list for that.
It's something I'm extremely excited about because really, what are we doing this auto grading for? So that was actually the next thing I was going to say before I show the same thing in Java, just for people that want to check it out in Java. And I'll move a little bit quicker now that we kind of get the basics of this. But it's to provide students with feedback, timely feedback. So instead of a student kind of waiting around for you to grade the assignment and make sure they did get it correct, or waiting for just a way to know if they're right instead of raising their hand and waiting, or especially in this digital hybrid, world that we're living in with the pandemic, where you may not see students for a certain duration of time and they're working on things more independently. We want to be able to provide them with timely feedback. And when you add tests like this, it makes it so they feel more comfortable that they've done things correctly and they're able to actually check their work. And doing things like the feedback that we have here, we can give them some helpful hints if they get it, if they don't pass the test, or if they're not getting it or it's not correct. So let's check out a very similar example in Java quick, just so we can see that it works the same way. So I'll just do a flow. It's kind of a little reminder of kind of how this flow worked. And then we can look at actually adding input. So I'm going to create a new assignment. I did switch over to another course if anyone was paying attention to that. It's a little bit easier because each course has a default language. So I just have a course set to Python as default and Java as default. But you can switch kind of between the languages for the course, just a couple extra steps. Of course, we can give a prompt. I'm not going to spend as much time setting that up. We can set the students up with a template of what we want them to see as soon as they open it up. So maybe because we want to actually know if they can, they remember how to do system.println. Maybe it's the first week of class in a Java class. So you want to remove this. Maybe you want to even remove, the class being set up and the public static void main header here. You can remove whatever you want, include whatever you want for the students in the template. We can go over to the test bench. Same idea now. I'm doing it just an input-output comparison. Just happens to be with Java now, and it looks exactly the same. Each language, the input-output comparison is going to be the same. We're monitoring, and we can make our own input stream, which we're going to check out next. But we can also match against a expected output stream from the student's code. Someone did just ask a question about setting a time constraint on assignments. The coding rooms team can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't believe that it's necessarily a constraint where the students won't be able to access the assignment past a certain date, but you can, over in the assign area, set a due date in which it will tell them that it's a late submission, essentially. It'll tell them that it's past the specific due date. So I know some platforms essentially lock out an assignment past a due date, so you can make it so they can't access it anymore. Coding rooms, you can still access it, but it will monitor that is a late submission, essentially. Or it indicates to the student that they're past due on the assignment. That's a great question, Barry. I would say that if you unpublish, they can't edit it anymore, but someone correct me if I'm wrong. There, so I think that would be the way that you could lock out the assignment, is you could unpublish it and students would no longer have access to it. It wouldn't show up on their course dashboard. Anyway, let's do a test here. I'm going to, just for the heck of it, let's do it so it's equals exactly. And so I'm going to do hello world. Capital letters here. I got exclamation point. Make sure you print hello world exactly as shown, maybe we want to say. So now they'll see this if they fail. Again, it's just matching the output. That's all we're looking at so far. I can go over. Of course, I can publish this. As Barry mentioned, if you don't want students to access it anymore past the due date, you just unpublish. I'm going to open up the student preview in a new tab here. So that I can see it as a student would see it and be able to test my submissions. Again, this is where, if you're looking for a spot to test to make sure your auto grading, your unit tests, et cetera, set up properly, open it as a student. It will say student preview, and you know you are opening it as a student. You can actually open the assignment workspace. And now you're viewing it as the student would. If I click submit here without me typing anything in, I failed. Let's actually add it. Let me try hello world like this first. Click submit again. Notice I still failed the test because this time I'm looking for an exact match. This would have passed if we set it up the other way, like we did with the Python example, where it ignored white space, uppercase characters, special characters. This one, it does not match. It needs to be exact. So just keep that in mind when you're doing an output comparison. capital W, I believe also. Now I can click submit and it should give me 100%. Notice the feedback only displays it on a test fail. So if a particular test that you set up, test case you set up, fails, it shows that feedback. Something to keep in mind, that that feedback is only for not when a test passes, but when it fails. So Tara asked about the student preview, so I'm going to show that one more time. Once you actually assign the assignment, so you go to the Assign tab in the assignment, this actually shows, even though I have examples here, this is actually each section that you have, so each section will populate over here. And you can preview for that particular, you can publish for that section, you can set a due date for that section of the class, of the course, and then right here is student preview. And I've just been opening that in a new tab here to make it easy for me to navigate back. Very, very useful because you want to test these things out, especially when you're setting up more complex auto grading, is you want to make sure you run it one time with your model solution or like what you expect the students to have and make sure it works. Great question. And you can see the student's code if they do not submit, as long as they've opened up the workspace. So let me see if I click on gradebook here, it only has me, of course, in this course. And I'd like to open up one of my classes, but for student privacy, with all my students' names showing up, I don't want to do that on this webinar. But essentially, all your students will show up here in the gradebook. If the student has opened up the assignment, it will say, Sasha, correct me if I'm wrong, I forget the exact name, it essentially says they're working on it, in progress, I believe it says. So if they've opened it, it will say in progress, and you can actually click, I think you can click their name or this actions button over here to actually open up their code and view it. And you'll see it just like this, where you can run their code, you can even submit their code for them, or test it against the test cases you've created, which I've done before. I've been in here helping students, and this is a real-time system, so you can see where the student's cursor is, and your cursor is also available. So the actual assignment area is collaborative, and multiple people can be in the assignment, and it will show their name. So you can see I'm the green cursor. If somebody else was in here, they'd have a different color cursor, and you can see where each person is as they highlight code and do different things. You can also see the submission history prior to submission. It will actually show you, if I come back here, how many submissions they've had. And if you click on their name, you can go to the submissions tab just like the student can, and you can see the submission history. You can also see, if you go to the playback, so let me click that area again, when you're in a student's submission, you can click this playback button and you can actually see their edits on this file also. So you can see what they were doing. For instance, maybe you got the copy and paste monster in your class that is just finding things and copy and pasting in. They're not really figuring out things. You would see that because all of a sudden they would just magically have something appear. As also, it's good for you to check kind of what was going on here. So you do have a file history right here for this file of the assignment, and you can click on that and you can check out what happened with the student there also. So you have the submissions history and that. One of the things to note that I've noticed is if you're helping a student and they go and submit it while you're also looking at the workspace still, you do have to click this refresh submissions to see the submission they most recently did. So sometimes they'll be helping a student, they click submit. They look at the submission, they go, oh, I failed again. I go, what? In order for me to actually see that, so you click on this button right here, just to see the prompt from that test case. And so I click refresh submissions, and then I can actually see the prompt that they most recently ran. All right, let's look at an input example. So often you may have code, right, that you, let's create an example where I'm going to do it in Python first again. I'm just going to create another assignment. We'll call it, what is your name? All right, so we're expecting the student to be able to get some user input, collect that into their program, and then maybe produce an output. Just for the sake of time, I'm not even going to write a prompt about it. Essentially, it's just going to be that they're going to use for Python, it's going to be the input function. Then it gets some user input, and they're going to produce an output. In this case, it's going to be we're going to ask the user, "What's your name?" And then we're going to print "hello blank," whatever their name happens to be or whatever they type in. So how can we test something like this? Because now there's variability in the program, right? So you may be thinking to yourself, well, I can't just test the output because it depends if they type in their name or whoever's running this code is going to type in different values. I'm just going to go straight to the test bench, actually. And let's add a test case. All right, so again, I just give the test case a name. This is more important when you have multiple test cases, you want to test multiple things, which we can do a couple tests here just to make sure the student's not fooling us in some way. So I'll explain that in a minute because there's different options, different things that could happen. So I'm going to do input-output comparison still. This time, though, what we're going to do is we're going to check the input stream. I'm sorry, we're going to mock essentially an input. We're going to provide values for the standard input that Python's going to create this input stream. We're going to provide it with values instead of actually prompting the user for values in the console. So for example, if the person types in Joe, we would expect the output to be "hello, Joe." So essentially what I'd want the student to do is they're going to ask the user for their name, and then they're creating an output that says "hello, comma, the person's name, exclamation point." So again, if I pass into as the input the word Joe, this is what I expect the output to be. Maybe I want to actually name this test in Joe. Now, technically speaking, we're matching against the output. So the student, if they get clever and check the submission, they may see, oh, he's just looking for, if it says "hello, Joe," print "hello, Joe." So we don't really want that. That's why we can set up multiple test cases to make sure that it can pass each one. Test in, we'll use my wife's name. All right. And so now we can add another test case, and we're going to test if they pass in Mackenzie. It should say, "hello, Mackenzie." So now it's going to test both of these. And now the student will have a much harder time, just mocking the one output value. Let's go over to the template. I'm sorry, let's assign this. I did just think of something that I wanted to make sure I brought up, so I'm going to actually show this off as an example of something important here. I'm opening up the student preview. Open the assignment workspace. I didn't modify the template, so it just has this print statement still in there. Let's just run the submit and let's see what it says. So I'm going to submit. Let's test it against these two test cases we set up. Let's see what the code says. It says, all right, test in for Joe failed, test in for Mackenzie failed. Input set to Joe, and it said this output, expected that, etc. So you can see failed both. All right, I'm going to try to be clever now. I'm going to say, all right, "hello, Joe," as output. Let's submit that. Okay, passed test in for Joe, didn't pass Mackenzie. For an example like this, I wouldn't give the student credit, even though it said scored 50 because it passed half the cases. This would be something you would say to the student, you got to pass all the test cases in order for the submission. This is a simple one, obviously. The reason why we're able to set this up is because, again, it passes in unique input values and expects a specific output. That's why you may want to set up multiple of these to make sure they can't mock anything. So maybe the student gets clever, right, and says, all right, well, I'll print out hello Mackenzie too. Print. All right, submit. And you'll notice too, this is a good thing to do. Do you open up the sample solution and it failed both because now they print out 2 values. So that's no good. What we want is, we want them, of course, to use input and actually collect a value from the user. So we'll set name equal to input. We'll use the input function. Now, in order to test out this code, let me just test it before hitting submit. You do have to use the instance interactive terminal. If you're just not outputting to the console down here, you can't just view it in the log. So if you're not familiar with coding rooms, you do have to start up an instance of a Linux machine to run your code on. So if I run this, it's waiting for an input. I can say Joe. It says hello, Joe. Oh, wait, I forgot to actually use that value, so that still wouldn't pass. Name concatenated with exclamation point. So now we have something. Perfect. Whatever your name is, you can do that. Now, some of you that, so actually let me just submit this to show you that it works. But I want to show one more thing about input and output that actually got me when I first did this. And I said, oh yeah, that makes sense. Sorry, I passed both tests now. I collect an input, whatever that input is, I store it in the name variable and make my little output there. It says hello in the person's name. Now, for those of you that are familiar with, just doing some basic programs like this with user input with students, in Python, you may teach them to actually provide a prompt here as one of the arguments in the input function, right? So you say to them, oh, it's nice. The user doesn't know what to type down here in the console. We need to alert them, say, what is your name? Okay. So, and then it will wait and they type in their name and it's going to collect it. In Java, you may tell them, all right, it's important before we actually get user input that we have some kind of print statement to alert the user. Same kind of idea. And in both situations, this is going to be an issue. Java, it's a little more easy to kind of understand. You should be able to just use the run button to run the Java file. If you have multiple Java files also, there will be a little selection drop down that you can select which Java file you'd like to run. But I'll showcase that in a minute also when we test this. Just make sure you use instance interactive terminal. All right, so I have this prompt now. All right, so let me run. I can run this code. Now it says, oh, what's your name? Okay, yeah, Joe. Beautiful, looks like it works great. It's exactly what we want our student to do. Let me go submit it though. I failed both tests. I just passed both tests before I added the prompt. Something to keep in mind is that the prompt is actually part of the output stream. So the output stream is anything that the program will output to the console. So technically that prompt is part of the output stream. So notice it says output was, what is your name? Hello, Joe. Did not match, just hello, Joe. So you have to keep that in mind. I do have, in a little bit, we're going to talk about some other things, and I have a website that will help you with some things. So I have some workarounds that I use for this, just testing the end of the output to see if it matches, the end of the output matches, what I expect and stuff like that for longer programs. that maybe ask a couple different things. But that's something to keep in mind. For this basic program that we want to auto grade, what you probably want to do is on the prompts, tell the students, prompt the user by asking them what is their name, and then produce the output. So you kind of guide them along to get this desired output. All I would need to do over in my tests is I'm going to add in front of hello Joe, I'm going to say, and I can actually put it on a new line because we're flexible with the way that we're testing the equality of these. So the output stream is going to be all one line. So technically speaking, if you want to do an exact match, you got to type it all in one line. But we can just do that here. So I said, what is your name? I'm going to go add that to the other test also. And now that's the expected output for both of those tests. What is your name is going to be output, one of the lines in the output, and then also it's going to say hello, the person's name when I test it. So just always keep that in mind. If I go back over, I'm going to click submit. And it should say everything's good now. Once again, I have a 100. Same idea. So we can go over. Let's check out a little example of this with Java quick. Let's just do the same idea. So I'm going to set up two test cases exactly the same. They're going to look. We'll pass Joe as an input. What is your name as a prompt? And then we'll expect it to say hello, Joe, as the output. This is a great question. And I believe, even though I've only been using coding rooms for this school year, that is one of the beauties of the way that the courses are set up. Is that the courses are the assignments are specific to your course, and your course has individual sections that you can assign the assignments to. So if you can delete your sections, add new sections for the new school year, and everything should be good. So you can create all these great assignments, assign them to your classes. Next school year, they'll still exist in coding rooms, and you can reassign them to your other classes. So at least that's what I'm expecting. And the coding rooms team can respond differently, but I believe that everything I understand about the system, it is that way. I'm just going to add this one test case just for the sake of time. But of course, I could do the same thing with somebody else's name. Let's go to assign. Open up the student preview. I'm going to open up this workspace. And if someone's still looking for running the Java file, you can kind of take a look at this. The top of the file, let's import our scanner. All right, I asked, for a prompt of this, so I can say, what is your name? And then let's actually get their name. And then we can print hello, concatenated with their name, concatenated with an exclamation point. I'm going to go over to instance, start it up, because I have input here, so we're going to need to start that up. Again, I should just be able to click run. I know someone had a question about that, but I should just be able to click run. And Python has me forgetting my semicolons. All right, ask me for my name, Joe. Hello, Joe. Maybe we want to give that a test again. Quick. Boom, seems to be working great. We give it a submit. Same idea. I did include the kind of other print, the extra print of what is your name, so that should work well. And it tested it. Again, it tests the output stream, input stream. Notice this does have a new line for the output, the actual output, and then the expected output. That's because I used the print ln. And so the output stream did have the new line character, so it does match that up. So again, sometimes you want to make sure you're running the student preview just to look at these small nuances of the matching you're doing. Any questions before we look at, we're going to look at unit testing next. So we'll do an example of that. I'll kind of give an explanation quick, and then I'm going to give an example of that. And then mainly I'm going to leave you with some good resources, I hope, for doing some more unit testing. All right. So imagine you want to create an assignment now. So input output, that was great. Maybe you're introducing your students to creating functions, and we just want to make sure that these functions are properly created, based on whatever specifications you're giving the student. Or in Java, maybe you're teaching them to define methods also, and same idea. Let's say, for instance, we want to have an assignment where the student has to create a function that calculates the average of 4 numbers. 5 numbers, because that's the example I over here that makes it easier for me to do. Okay, so define a function that calculates the average of 5 numbers, whatever it may be. And returns the average. All right, so this isn't printing anything. It's not going to create an output. It can when we test it, right? But it's not going to necessarily have an output, or we don't necessarily even care about that. Well, this is the whole idea of unit testing. So maybe some of you are familiar with unit testing. Actually, I should say an important thing here. Typically what I do with my students depends on what you give them. Define a function that calculates the average of 5 numbers and returns average. Name the function average. Because that's going to be an important part of the way we're going to be able to test it, is that they name it the same way that what we expect them to name it. Now, what you could do, of course, and certainly you could set it up for them, pre-set up the function for them. maybe you just leave this here for them, so that makes it a little bit easier. Maybe you give them even more information. Depends on what you want to give them as starter template. Let's say we want to, give them nothing. That's fine too. Whatever you want to set up as the starter template. What we can do is, in the test bench, you're going to do a unit test now. So what unit tests are for, and so that's what I was getting at. Some of you may be familiar with unit tests. It essentially allows us to test a unit or a piece of code, like a function. So something like any procedural abstraction, something that allows us to make a subprogram, we can test that subprogram. So we can test out this individual function to assure that it equals something else, or assert that it equals a value, etc. So we can test that it is working properly. So when you do that, you're going to get, and we have a Python one set up, so it's going to use Python 3 unit test because that's what I'm using. If we're in Java, it's going to use JUnit. These are frameworks, and so you can do Google searches and find a lot of information online about these. These are very standard frameworks for doing unit testing with those two languages. There are 3 different sections that you're looking at here: setup, tear down, and then you can define your test cases. Setup is for any code you want to run before each test. Tear down is going to be anything you want to do or run after each test. And then down here, you can define each of the tests you want to do. So you can define multiple tests here. They should start with the word test, so test something. But for this, for instance, we can just put whatever logic we want it to actually evaluate as part of this test case. For instance, there are different asserts that you can use. For instance, this one here says assert true. I'll show you in a minute a resource for this, but what we want to do is we're going to assert that this particular function is going to equal a certain value, or what the value that this function is going to return is going to equal a certain thing. We're going to know that if we call the function and give it certain values, that it's going to spit out a particular average, essentially. So we'll have a couple test cases for this. For instance, if we average 5 numbers and we give it 1, 5, 7, 4, and 10, it's going to come out to 5.4. Okay. So I can say 5.4 should be equal to, if we call file, that's the name of our, I'll explain why that in a minute, dot average, and we give it the numbers 1, 5, 7, 4, and 10. Now at decimal values, in this case floats, in Java if we were dealing with doubles, those data types, we're going to want to also provide a delta. So if the computer does any rounding, we're all set. It doesn't care about that. So any values like that, you're going to want to give a plus minus possible change in that value. So now 5.4 will compare to whatever this gives. Now our actual, if I go over to the template quick, the default file we have here is called file.py. So that's why in the test bench for this unit test, I'm using file.average. I'm calling that specific function from that actual Python file. We're essentially going to import it as a module. So the important thing to do here to make that work is actually import file first here. So we're saying, okay, our unit test is going to import the student's file, and we want to test out their average function that they're going to create. And we want to make sure it's equal to this. Same thing, self.assert essentially we're going to make sure that these values equal each other. What the assert does is if this evaluation does not come out as true, that these things don't equal each other, it will throw an error on the actual test, and it will say, hey, this is what's wrong. This did not equal this, and it will actually show how it didn't equal it. So we can do another test, of course, because we don't want them to just return a specific value that we're testing. So we want to do at least 2 different tests. So we're going to make sure that if we call average and we give it 1, 5, 7, 4, and 10, it's going to be equal 5.4. And if we call average and we give it 5, 9, 24, 6, and 4, that it equals 9.6. I'm going to go to assign now. Let's open this up. Dump in a solution quick. So we define average. We take in 5 values, we add them up, and we return the sum of those divided by 5, something like that. You can do, right? Maybe the student wants to test it themselves. That won't affect our grading at all because we don't care about what they output. So they can test it. They can say, okay, I want to make sure this is working. So I'm going to print average. They run it, and they get their result. Okay. Go to submit. Oops, I messed something up. Did I not put self in front of it? No.
I think, Joe, the fix here is to import from, yeah.
What was that, Sasha?
My idea is that you import average from file.
It might be that. Did it say that? I know file is kind of a funky.
Yeah, yep. And this actually was one of the things that we're updating in our V2 IDE, changing the default file names.
No, so I think it's actually, I'm sorry. I think it's because we actually have to, with a double float value, we have to say assert almost equal. I think that's what it is. So I think I actually messed up here. Apologize to everyone else. Bam. So we're good. So I thought because I was afraid of that too, Sasha, because file is a keyword in Python. But I think we're okay with that. Okay, so notice I use this different assert, and I'm going to show you in a minute some of those almost equal, I should say, and that actually allows for the delta value. So when you're dealing with floating point numbers, that's the one you want to use there. Of course, what I wanted to show though is, and that's why it's important to tell the student, if you're doing it the way that I didn't, you just gave them a blank slate, is to tell them to name things properly. So all of a sudden you get the student that says, oh, capital A average, they go to submit, and we're going to have an issue with that because now it's actually trying to use, it's looking for the function. So notice down here, it says very similar error to what I had before. But module file has no attribute average, lowercase a. So it's looking for that. I will say, when I started doing this, my students were really keen on looking at this and being like, oh, I didn't spell that right. Like, it's supposed to be average. So they're pretty good at looking at this feedback and doing that. Now, what I would like to do, if it's your first time doing functions with a student, for instance, I would actually provide on the test feedback that as a clue. Make sure you named your function this, because that's going to be, as you kind of do these with your students, you go back, you kind of add more, you iterate on the process of developing these, right? And you add more information. You go, oh, a lot of the kids, didn't actually define their function name with the name average in all lowercase letters. Let me make sure that I provide them with feedback saying, if they fail the test, make sure you name it this way. So that can be really helpful. I like the layout of V2 also. So what I want to show you is, you may be saying to yourself, so I fumbled on this. I said, oh, you know what, it's almost equal. And my notes even said that, but I decided to just type equal in front of you guys for whatever reason. And so where can you find out this information? Well, what I want to share, and then we'll check out a Java example of this, and then I'll show you some more, just some of the examples. So mainly I'm going to leave you with examples at this point. Is if you go over, I'm going to give you this URL. I'm starting to create a website to really help teachers out with this, because I'm seeing the power of auto grading and providing students with timely feedback, and I really want everyone to be successful with it. And so I'm starting to create this web page for you to be able to find out really useful information. For instance, maybe you're looking at, and I actually don't think I have almost equal listed. For instance, you're looking at, you're like, oh, well, what kind of tests can I do? What kind of asserts can I do to actually, match and test out my students' created functions, their code, stuff like that? Well, I give you a nice list of some of the useful ones that I think. Assert almost equal needs to be added to this. I think I was getting confused because Java, you don't need to say almost equal. You just say equal, and you can, it works for double values also. They're fairly similar, Java and Python. Most of these function and method calls. So it will be pretty easy to switch between, but there are some things you got to check sometimes. I provide a number of different examples also. So for instance, let's power through and look at my Java example for a return method, just like we did. I have one for average here. What would you do for Java for this same thing? Well, you would just have a test case. You'd say assert equals, give the expected value, actually call the method from the student's code, whatever the student's code file is named. The default would be main.java, so you say main.average. Give it a delta, plus minus how much can the actual equality differ. This is what the student's code would look like. They would define a static method that returns a double. Actually, in this example, I think I say, oh, have the values be an int. So then they have to do some casting. This is actually from one of my exercises with students. So they this would be an example of that, and that's all this setup would be. I have some examples here, and I have some more work to add. What I want to encourage you to do is, if you want to see other things on this page, submit it to me. So I've set up a form for you to submit, like, hey, Joe, want to add an example of how to do this? And if I find some time, hopefully I'll get back to you pretty quickly about it. Usually I get excited because I kind of want to try out some things too. So if you have something you want to try out, you can do that. Obviously, you can think some things are harder to auto grade than other things, but I would like to, hear that. If there's ones that you'd like to add, like you build one, you're excited about it, you think it would be useful for other teachers, please share it with me on this forum also, and I'll add it to the site. And of course, I'll credit you also as being, your example. But I think this could be a really nice collaborative space for us to start to share different examples of how to do this. Great question. Yes, you can see all your students. So in that gradebook view, this example class, it's only me. So that's why it's just saying that, because it's just not something with students. If we were to add into something else, it would have a bunch of different names here. So it would have all the different student names listed here, and you could see how many submissions they have, their top score of their submissions, and you can open up their workspace to check everything out. You can even, in the actual entire course view, there's a gradebook. And this is really useful also for getting a larger view of your students and their assignments. So that was one assignment at a time. This gradebook at the actual course level lets you see each of your assignments, the class average, and each of the individual students and their performance on just that individual assignment. And then if you want to go to the specific assignment to check out more details and open up the workspace, each of these are active links that bring you to that specific assignment. So for assignments, I'm not sure if the team has any plans for stuff like that in the future, but it is for assignments, it is just for one individual. Technically for a student, I mean, they and the teacher can go in. But what I'm hoping to do on my next webinar is I'm going to actually talk about the live classroom more, and we're going to talk about strategies for breakout rooms and doing some other things like this, group projects, breakout rooms and stuff like that. And I recommend using the live classroom for that. Actually, Barry's on the call, and Barry and I were speaking about that a little bit, and I tried out something with my class and it worked really well. So I think that's a better collaborative space for some of that type of work. Now, one of the things I want to mention that I have on the site here is if I go over to some of my assignments, let's see, let me go into one of my actual classes. I actually put 3 different things they have to work on. Like this over a couple of days, they're going to work on a couple different exercises. And I put 3 different ones in one assignment. And so that just reduces the number of like full assignments that I have. And so when you set up something like this, you have to do things a little more uniquely when it comes to input-output tests and stuff like that. Because my students have different Java files that they're going to put in. For instance, I just opened the Java one. My Python is similar. They have different Python files that they're going to put the solutions to the individual questions that I ask them. So what I do is I set up a test case for each of the different questions. And what you have to do is you have to do some interesting things if it's like input-output type of things that you're trying to test. In my examples, when it says output, input, it's not the basic input-output stuff that I'm talking about that we looked at together. This is actually a little bit more complex, where I have examples where you're doing unit testing and you're actually monitoring the standard output and you're providing a standard input for the auto test to use. So if you're looking for, you have something that's a little bit more of a complex setup, you may want to check out these output and input tests that I have on the site to kind of check out those things. For instance, maybe you're doing like void methods where they're just printing values instead because you haven't taught them about return values yet. You maybe need to monitor the output stream. So what we do for that is on setup, you start monitoring the output stream. In between each test, you reset that so that you don't, hold on to that output from a previous test. And then all it does is you give your tests. This example, for instance, is with a class. So they have this class employee. We construct it, and then we're actually printing it because they're supposed to actually have a toString. And so we're testing out the toString method here. Same thing as if we wanted to do like I think I have an example of a void method somewhere in here. Maybe it's just the toString, which is a well, actually that's not, that would be return a string, but where do I have? But anyway, so you notice that I store answer and output in variables and just kind of assert equals to them. So to check it out, that just makes it a little easier to read, but you can throw all that in there. And we're just looking at the output stream. And then I even have some things to convert it to all lowercase, trim any end characters and stuff like that. All those kind of things to clean up the output while you compare. So check out some examples if you have some more complex things there. But of course, I'm looking for many different things that we can add to this website. Someone asked a question directly to me a minute ago. Sasha, I think it was you. Is it possible to see progress by student for all assignments? What do you mean by that? And maybe it was someone else's question too.
Yeah, I dropped that one in just on the full gradebook that we saw for the prior example. Something that I've seen come up is like to be able to see to slice by student instead of slicing by assignment, and clicking that open allows you to view that student's grade.
Now I understand. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this is a really great thing too. So you can click on this and you can see that specific student. So for instance, here's me, and it shows my attempts top score for that. Sasha, as a note, it would be really nice if we could click on this and open up that student's workspace.
No, got it, writing it down. John just asked a question, but I couldn't assign students to work together, and can I add template files for it? Brand new, just came out last week, I believe. Live classrooms do allow you to have templates now. So you can use that space to set up a template ahead of time for just your normal live class, or you can set up these live classrooms as breakout rooms, group assignments, etc., for students to collaboratively work together. If you create a new classroom, I'm going to create this Java one just as an example. On this screen here, you can set up the template files, edit template. And I can actually now set up my template files for the live classrooms. For those of you that are familiar with coding rooms and maybe have already tried that out, and that was an issue in the past. I'm not sure if I put this in here. I'm just going to throw the link over to the Autograding page again, if everybody's interested in that. And again, check out some of those things. Like I said, looking at testing out classes. So what I would do for those kind of things is you're going to construct the object that the student's class file is kind of supposed to design to be. You can test out the individual methods to make sure they work properly. You test out all the different components and you set them up as different unit tests. And you'll kind of see that different tests to make sure each of those components work well. What I'm hoping is in the future, if anybody's interested, we can focus, we can have other workshops and webinars to focus more on some of those specific details.